So Kyle, we're here today, buddy. We're gonna have a look at some above ground or insulation values, right, for pre-concrete. Generally these ones are a little bit simpler and quicker than most of our inspections.
Yeah, for sure.
But before we go in, as always, we have to get our hard hats on and make sure that we have our safety gear, which includes our boots at this trip.
Perfect. So let's grab our hats.
All right. So Kyle, this is kind of what we're here to look at today, our inspection. This particular house, basically this is the bottom level.
That's right, yeah.
There's no basement typically, right? So the reason that we want to see this before they pour concrete over it is basically to make sure that they meet the requirements for the amount of insulation. All right, so this is all about the energy.
That's right, yes, exactly.
But during this time, sometimes we will look at the underground plumbing at this stage, just to pick up on any deficiencies from the previous underground plumbing inspection report, right?
Yeah, and we can always look at the file to see if there's any.
To determine that. So in this case here, there was none identified. The underground was good, so we're basically just going to look at our insulation here. So the requirement is if this floor level is less than 4 feet or 1.2 meters from grade, then it requires some insulation values.
That's right.
Inboard. And that's basically to mitigate any coldness that would come into the building.
Exactly, creating a thermal break between the outside, the cold air outside and the floor inside, the interior space.
Yeah. So this one, as you can see, which does meet the requirement. So they have to put down a certain R value when they put it horizontally like this, 4 feet in from the perimeter. And what is that R value?
So in this case, it looks like this is going to be not going to be a heated floor. So in this case, it would be an R10.
Right.
If this floor was heated, then you'd have to bump that insulation value up a bit. So we would be looking at an R13.
R13.
For that floor.
And why is it only out to here?
So that it can create that thermal break from the wall itself. So the idea being that, you know, the interior here is, you're going to lose less heat in here than you will out here around the perimeter of the
And if this was a heated floor, what would we see?
So in this case, then you would see the heating pipes in place, and you would see an R13, a minimum of R13 on this floor.
It would be the entire floor.
The entire floor.
Not just the 4 feet in. So you can see as we walk around on this insulation has to be a certain type as well, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so it has to be a type of insulation that when it's in contact with the ground, it doesn't soak up any moisture.
That's right.
And the reason they don't want it soaking up any moisture is the fact that if it did soak up moisture, it loses all of its R value properties, right? And then it doesn't do what it's intended to do. So I believe this is type 2 insulation, which is a closed cell, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't allow the water up into it.
Yep.
So this installation is pretty good. The joints are tight. We want it as tight as possible. And we come over this way a little bit. And what else do we notice that might be missing at this stage?
So right now at this particular site, we're missing our vapor barrier. So there would be a vapor barrier that would be covering this entire floor. Mm-hmm. That would seal, obviously, the vapor from coming up through the floor into the concrete and into the conditioned space. So what we'd be looking for in that case would be a 6 mil, a minimum 6 mil poly on the floor that is sealed, that runs up the sides of the foundation wall, the exposed foundation wall there, to create that vapor break from the ground below.
And you mentioned earlier about a thermal break, and can you just kind of elaborate on what a thermal break is?
Sure. So a thermal break is just a break between two types of materials so that heat does not transfer easily through one material into the other.
Right.
So in this case here, we have a piece of exposed foundation wall here. So we don't want the slab to be poured right up to that foundation wall, because then that way the heat can transfer freely between.
Right.
So we want to see a thermal break there. Yeah, so we have there was a little piece of foam here laying on the floor. So essentially what they're going to do is take a piece of this larger foam, and they'll rip it down, and they're going to sit it in here like this.
Right on.
And that creates a thermal break between this slab and the foundation wall.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and what's the requirement for that R value?
So in this case, you can rip it down, the R10 down, to add it in there. But with the heated floor, you can't rip the foam down.
Right, right. It has to be the full thickness.
That's right.
So that there would be an R10, right? The 2 inches is an R10.
That's right.
Right. Generally, the 2.5 will be the R13.
That's right.
Yeah. And just a little funky thing happening over here, or as people pointed out before, kooky, wonky, whatever you want to say. You see that there's a little bit of difference in elevation here.
Yeah, so right here we've got a little bit of a break there in the insulation, but what's going to happen there is the floor, because this is a garage space here, you can see the garage door, that floor is going to be slightly lower than the remainder of the house, so that foam will bend down when the concrete gets placed on it.
Exactly right. So the garage floor will be sloped a little bit this way, right?
That's right.
Allow the fumes or any gas fumes to escape the garage.
That's right.
Yeah. So the folks here in this example decided to do the 4 feet in. Mm-hmm. Is there any other way that this could have been done without coming in 4 feet with insulation?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways that you can insulate under slab. So there's the way that we see it here. Mm-hmm. There's also doing the entire floor. So mm-hmm. sometimes the contractor or the homeowner will do the entire floor system. There's also doing the interior and exterior of the foundation wall itself.
Right. So it could be as simple as instead of a conventional foundation, they could have used ICF.
That's right.
And as we all know, ICF inherently has insulation built into it, right?
That's right.
So that would create your insulation requirement there. If they didn't do that and didn't do this, what options would they have?
So if in those cases, they could do the exterior of the wall before they backfilled it, or they could do the interior of the foundation wall before the rock and the plumbing and everything else, all the mechanicals get into the space.
Right, and that would have to extend down to?
That would have to extend down to the 1.2 or 4 foot mark.
Right. Or in the case if it's a frost wall, down to the footing.
That's right. Yeah. And that's a good point too, Pat, to bring up, is if this was a stepped foundation and there was an 8-foot wall at the back of the building and it was a walkout in the front, you would want to extend that foam to that 1.2 meter mark on that foundation wall.
Right. Do you see any issues with this one?
No, I don't. The only thing, again, we'll make note of is that the vapor barrier, the poly vapor barrier, is not down yet. Yeah. But we'd want to make sure that too, that they're sealed around these pipe penetrations here, mm-hmm. to make sure that there's no gases or anything that's going to come up around them. Another thing we should talk about is the soil gas pipe.
Yeah. So would you like to point that out to me?
Yeah. So I see there was one over here, and it's got a label on the cap. Right. You'll either see soil gas written on there, or a lot of people will just write radon on it.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's intended for. Yeah. So it's a pipe that it's in a mechanical room or some space. Sometimes they'll put them under stairs or what have you. Mm-hmm. But most of the time you see them in a mechanical room, and it's just a rough-in for soil gas that may be trapped under the slab, that if they were to test for it, they're able to mitigate it through that pipe.
Right on. So the whole idea is if there's any gas to develop, it's developed or held within below the concrete. And this is what we call an extraction pipe, right? So
That's right.
They can get their place tested. If there's radon, they can hook up an inline fan and pump it to the outside.
That's right.
Yeah.
And typically these have an elbow on them. We can't see it here in this case because it's covered.
Yeah.
But it'll have an elbow, a 90-degree elbow, and it runs
Yeah.
to somewheres near the center of the slab.
Yeah, they try to usually pop these up in kind of a hidden space or a space out of the way anyway.
Yeah, sometimes you'll see them in a wall cavity, which if they are, they just need to have access
Yeah.
hatch.
All right, and just to clarify the point of the poly, and we do use the term vapor barrier poly, and it actually does a lot more than just vapor barrier permeance, right? So it acts as an air barrier, right? It also acts as soil gas control as
That's
well,
right.
So it does all that stuff. All right, let's go write up the report.
Sounds good?
Let's go.
All right, Pat, so we'll write up the inspection report there on the iPad and send it off.
Perfect. Sounds good to me. Let's put our hard hats away. Get our nice Lisboa hat on. And we'll move on to the next one.